Brought to you by Charity Mobile, the phone company that supports life and family. 5% of your monthly plan price goes to your favorite charity. Buy the way you believe at CharityMobile.com and use promo code TRADITION. I often have to take an unpopular position here, one that tends to ruffle some feathers. It is my belief that most of the popes from the post-conciliar era were moderates. They weren't. We may call them conservatives, but remember, secular political terms don't tend to work. But in the great scheme of things in the church, the most conservative of them have been moderates, and that's being charitable in the eyes of some. The most likely outcome is that you'll get a placeholder pope that follows Francis, a moderate, someone who will not ruffle too many feathers, who will not say venomous things to upset the laity, but who, most importantly, will not do too much to change what the things Francis has done to the church. Maybe the most egregious things will be quietly rescinded, and I say quietly because they will issue clarifying documents that functionally rescind fiducia supplicans and things like that, but mostly they're not going to change things fundamentally, and especially in the Roman Curia. They won't get rid of the Jesuits and the St. Gallen group and all the rest of them that have undermined the church since the council. That is essential for what the next pope must do. And we're talking here about this because an African cardinal who had taken a leadership position against fiducia supplicans suddenly started being talked about by the Catholic media as being a potential successor to Francis. And he may very well be. He's positioning himself as a moderate. He rejected fiducia supplicans, but only for the African continent because of culture there. He met with Francis to get that permission. And he just endorsed Francis's most radical reform to the church, the one that will, according to high-ranking officials in the Roman Curia, be impossible to rescind, and that is synodality. Many people don't understand why synodality is evil, but when you bring the laity up to governing the church that Christ established as a hierarchical institution, it undermines the sacraments, it undermines the office of the bishop who we are to remain in communion with, it undermines the very notion of authority in the church. And this African cardinal has positioned himself nicely to become a moderate who will do virtually nothing to fix the things that Francis has done, should this happen anytime soon. Again, I'll remind people, as I constantly do, don't expect another conclave as soon as some people might think. Yes, Francis is not doing well, physically, but he may be around for quite some time. That having been said, headline from Vatican News. Cardinal Mbongo, through synodality, Church in Africa living in a new Kairos moment. The president of the Symposium of Episcopal Conferences of Africa and Madagascar says the Church in Africa is living in a new Kairos moment as the Church continues to grow. So, Cardinal Mbongo is widely seen as having his popability increase in light of his leadership in Africa due to rejecting fiducia supplicans. Popability means his chances of being chosen by his peers at the next conclave to become the Pope. He would be the first Pope from sub-Saharan Africa ever. There have been popes from North Africa before, but those were also in the ancient days of the Church. The vast majority of popes in history were Italian, and the ones who weren't Italian were European. Even Francis is European. His family are Italian. They moved to Argentina almost a century ago. But Francis is Italian. That would itself be a major change in the church, and one that I would be surprised if didn't happen at the next conclave, simply because there has been greater and greater emphasis on the places in the world where the faith is growing, at least on paper, and that is Africa and Asia. That's why I also suggest people keep an eye on Cardinal Tagle, who would not be a moderate at all. He would be a Francis II very much. He may even take the name. But Cardinal Mbongo would be a good contender to follow Francis as a moderate. The statement that you're going to hear proves it too, because he will not challenge Francis's key reform of the church, synodality. And that reform is essential to undermining the church and finishing the turning of the faith from God-focused to man-focused. They have bragged in the years and decades after Vatican II that the Council gave a man-centered focus to the faith. It's in the documents of Vatican II. Now, how you interpret those documents has been the crux of the post-conciliar era, with more moderate popes and some of the more conservative ones trying to actually, while focusing on human dignity as a teaching in a world that's gone mad, they've clearly tried to also remain God-focused, which is what you should do in the church, is keep your eyes firmly focused on that cross. But this will finish the job. But here is what the Cardinal has to say. Quote, regarding the Church's synodal journey, Cardinal Fridolin Ambongo Besungu said, what we are experiencing now in Africa is for him a new kairos. The word kairos comes from an ancient Greek term translated as the right time or opportune moment. The synod can be a new opportunity to listen more to young people because synodality means listening more and walking together, said Cardinal Ambongo. Although a large proportion of Catholics in Africa are young people below the age of 35, Cardinal Ambongo expressed concern with the number of young Africans who leave to go elsewhere in pursuit of greener pastures. The synod can be a new opportunity for young people, despite the problem of people leaving. Got to be careful how you talk about that issue on this platform. I discovered that firsthand years ago. Cardinal Ambongo suggests collaboration between the local church and African governments to create new opportunities for young people who think that Europe is paradise. According to the Cardinal, the synod can be a new Pentecost for young people, but all sectors must work together with governments to seek solutions young people themselves will find useful, he said. End quote. That could have been said by any of the post-conciliar popes, especially by Francis. This working with the government stuff, but please, please, please be wary of anybody who unironically uses the term New Pentecost. It's borderline blasphemous. There was one Pentecost in the church, and that was, some say, the birth of the church was at Pentecost. Others say it was the Last Supper. Theologians debate that. But the implication is it's a new birth for the church. Why does the church need to be born again? And why does it have to be at the instrumentation of man? That's the implication. This new Pentecost language is something you should always be wary of. And yes, I know a lot of people's favorite popes use that term too, but please evaluate that stuff critically. Another concerning statement he made was that he was asked in this article, very short article here, if he was about deaconesses. And he said that that it requires further study, which is his way of sort of punting on the question. And I got to ask, why does it need further study? John Paul II said no, definitively. Case closed. 1990s, case closed. And frankly, he didn't need to say anything because the church has consistently taught the same things about holy orders and how they're limited only to men. Full stop. This doesn't need further study. What needs to happen is the advocates for deaconesses need to be excommunicated, but that's not going to happen either. And don't worry, further study is happening right now. We'll probably get some kind of ruling later this year, probably before the October meeting of the Synod on Synodality. Cardinal Ambongo, who traditionalists had just a couple of weeks ago been celebrating for his stance and leadership on the matter of fiducia supplicans in Africa, has stepped forward and is a contender for the moderate don't rock the boat and don't fix most of the problems Francis caused successor to Francis. The kind of man who will take who will probably be John Paul III if he were to take that kind of a name. That's my suspicion. I'm not saying he's going to become Pope. There's some other contenders for moderate to conservative popes to undo what Francis has done, or moderates who will just try to keep the peace for a short time until the next conclave. But he is widely talked about now as being papabile, meaning capable of being elected Pope by his peers at the next conclave, whenever that happens. But instead of planning for the next conclave, I would recommend people be ready for the next consistory. Whereas a conclave is when cardinals meet together to elect a new Roman pontiff, a consistory is when the Pope calls the cardinals together for a meeting, usually including having some archbishop somewhere become a cardinal, a member of the College of Cardinals. He gets his red hat, becomes a cardinal, thus technically allowing him to become Pope later, but also gives him the ability to participate in future elections for the Roman pontiff. That's likely to happen because, as widely reported, a whole bunch of cardinals are going to retire this year, And by early next year, the number of cardinals needed to hold a conclave, according to canon law, will drop below the minimum number. And when that happens, you're going to have some problems. So Francis is highly likely to call another consistory later this year. And we'll see what happens with that. But that's what I would keep an eye on first and foremost instead of the next conclave, which might not happen for 5 years. But I'm curious what you think about this. Are you surprised that a cardinal who was so instrumental in rejecting fiducia supplicans is now essentially endorsing Francis's key reform, synodality? That we will never stop hearing the term synodality and the synodal church because many of the moderate cardinals are actually embracing the concept and are waffling on the issue of deaconesses. Let me know what you think about all this in the comments, please, and hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. So does sharing this on social media. That helps enormously too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.